darkness of the cave seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. I stood at the mouth of Actun Tunichil Muknal, or the Cave of the Crystal Sepulchre in Belize. My friend Javier and I had been planning this spelunking trip for months. As experienced cavers, we were excited to explore one of the most revered and mysterious cave systems in Central America. Our guide, a local named Miguel, warned us about the cave's history. This place is sacred to the ancient Maya, he said. Many believe it to be a portal to the underworld. Do not disturb anything. With a mixture of excitement and apprehension, we descended into the cave. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the narrow passages. We carefully navigated the slippery rocks and tight squeezes, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. After about an hour, we reached the first chamber, known for its stunning stalactites and stalagmites. The natural formations were breathtaking, but it was the ancient artifacts that truly captured our attention. Pottery shards, stone tools, and even skeletal remains littered the ground, untouched for centuries. "Look at this," Javier whispered, holding up a piece of intricately carved pottery. The symbols etched into the clay seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and an uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. Miguel frowned. "Remember, do not disturb anything," he repeated sternly. We nodded and continued deeper into the cave. The next chamber was even more impressive, with an underground river running through it. We carefully waded through the waist-deep water, feeling the cold seep into our bones. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "Did you see that?" Javier asked, his voice trembling slightly. I turned to see where he was pointing. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the water, its eyes glowing in the darkness. But when I shone my light on the spot, it was gone. "Just a trick of the light," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. But the feeling of being watched lingered. We pressed on, reaching a narrow passage that required us to crawl on our hands and knees. As I squeezed through, the air grew colder and heavier. A strange sound, like distant whispers, filled the passage. I paused, straining to hear. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Javier nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "It sounds like chanting." We emerged into a final chamber, the largest yet. In the center stood a large stone altar, surrounded by more artifacts and skeletal remains. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the whispering grew louder. Miguel's face was pale. "This is the heart of the cave. The Maya performed their most sacred rituals here. We should leave." But curiosity got the better of us. Javier approached the altar, his flashlight illuminating a series of carvings depicting gruesome sacrifices and vengeful spirits. As he reached out to touch one of the carvings, the whispering grew into a deafening roar. "Stop!" Miguel shouted, but it was too late. Javier's hand brushed the stone, and the room plunged into darkness. Our flashlights went out simultaneously, and the air grew colder still. Panic set in. We fumbled with our flashlights, but they wouldn't turn back on. The darkness was absolute, and the whispering had transformed into a chorus of anguished screams. "Run!" Miguel shouted, grabbing my arm. We stumbled back the way we came, the darkness pressing in on us. The screams followed, echoing through the narrow passageways. I could feel a cold, malevolent presence closing in. We reached the underground river and plunged into the water, the icy current nearly sweeping us away. I could barely see Miguel and Javier ahead of me, their forms silhouetted against the faint glow of the cave's entrance. As we scrambled out of the river, I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down and saw skeletal hands reaching out from the water, grasping at my ankles. I kicked frantically, breaking free and running towards the exit. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, the screams growing louder and more desperate. Just as I thought I couldn't run any further, we burst out into the open air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the jungle. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The screams had stopped, replaced by the chirping of insects and the rustling of leaves. I looked back at the cave entrance, half expecting to see those glowing eyes watching us. "We should never have gone in there," Miguel said, his voice shaking. "The spirits of the cave. They are angry." We packed up our gear in silence, the weight of what we had experienced hanging over us. As we made our way back to the village, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The jungle seemed to close in around us, the shadows growing longer and darker. That night I dreamt of the cave. I saw the altar, the carvings, and the spirits. They whispered to me, their voices filled with anger and sorrow. I woke up in a cold sweat, the memory of their screams echoing in my mind. We left Belize the next day, but the experience stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something ancient and powerful. Javier and I never spoke of the cave again, but the nightmares continued. Years later, I heard that the cave had been closed to the public. Too many unexplained accidents and disappearances had forced the authorities to seal it off. But the locals knew the truth. The spirits of the Cave of the Dead were not to be trifled with, and they would never rest until their sacred burial grounds were left in peace. As I write this, I can still hear the whispers in the back of my mind. A part of me wonders if we left something behind in that cave, something that will never let us go.